How's it going, everyone? This is Phil here, and Luke's with me on the other side of the table. Say hello.
What's up, Phil? How's it going, man?
Good. Thanks for joining us for episode 3 or 4 of our podcast. I'm already losing track. It's not a good sign.
That's not a good sign. There's 4 of them. What are you going to do if we're like 25?
We're gonna have to write it down on the table and just leave it there, and I'm gonna go 25. Anyways, we're kind of diving into some serious topics here. We're going to kind of try to keep it light, but stuff we really care about and that we have not only gone through but experienced and know people that have experienced a lot of this kind of side of athletics as well as mental health and stuff like that. That's the only thing I know, so I'm going to give it over to Luke for the question of the day to kind of lead us off into the conversation. Luke, go ahead.
Yeah, we're going to start a little lighthearted, just kind of talk about our own situations first. I think that we should preface this by we kind of have some expertise on this subject. I was a psych major for my undergrad. I was very into mental health. I still am, and especially the stigma around it and everything like that. And obviously, Phil was a college athlete for 4 years and probably understands that side of it more. Like in high school, I felt pressure moments and stuff, but it's not even close to the same thing as when you get to that level or... You know, I'm sure that you guys at this point have kind of determined where we're going to go a little bit later in the episode. But I'm just going to start with this. What is the most pressure-packed moment you had in your athletic career?
Pressure-packed moment in my athletic career. There were a lot, you know. I think at every big milestone in the career of swimming, where I was going to go, like, oh shoot, I want to make this cut to make it to this meet where, you know, I'm obviously going to perform because this is junior nationals or something like that. So there were a lot of moments along where I was like, okay, this is the next big step. And I would say overall probably the biggest one was my senior year of high school, our final championship meet for high school swimming, not for club. Club meets were obviously more competitive and were more serious. Time-wise, high school was more competitive because you're trying to score for your team. But it would have been my senior year of high school, our high school meet. You know, I had already chosen a college to go to, but I had broken my arm about 4 months prior to that and was in a cast for 8 weeks. And I really wanted to make the state meet at this point. It was the first year California ever had a swimming state meet. Ironic that almost every other state has a state meet for the last 10 decades, but California didn't, and it's the swimming state. But I really wanted to make it because a lot of my friends on my club team were going, but they weren't on my high school team. You know, I was the only swimmer at my level on my high school team, to where it was like I really want to go represent Yosemite High School. And I ended up not making it. I didn't end up making the cut. It was a ridiculously fast time. You know, if you know anything about California swimming, you'd know how hard the state cuts are. You know,
I imagine none of our listeners are going to know anything about California.
You can imagine, though, it's California. It's going to be fast. Yeah. You know, that's where swimmers come from. And that was probably it. And it was a big lesson I had to learn and kind of overcome. And you know, I went in at it, and I ended up doing well when I look back, and I'm like, okay, you know what? I broke my arm, man. I couldn't even swim for 8 weeks a few months prior to this huge meet. So I think that was the most pressure I've ever felt, and going into that was like super stressed out. I think that, you know, somewhat affected me. I was still able to perform okay. You know, I actually won the meet in the event I swam, my main event. But I think that would definitely take the cake because it was like, okay, this is the milestone. I already have accomplished what I needed to do. You know, I made it to a college. I was already planning on swimming there. This is just like an added bonus, you know. And it was more of a challenge than landing a school. You had a lot more options finding a school. You know, okay, you weren't fast enough for this school. Well, there's 1,000 different other options. For this, it was like there's one state meet. That's it. That's the only chance you get, and that's and if you don't make it, okay, I was a senior. There's no better luck next year. That's it. It's the only chance you have. So that's probably it.
I would say I have 2 different answers for this, and it's kind of just like a different mentality on both. I definitely put the most pressure on myself in football. There was probably different moments of track or golf or basketball that were actually more in depth, more pressure packed from an outside perspective. But in high school, my best sport was football. I was decent enough to go to a college for a year. I mean, I didn't do anything special in college. I quit, so nothing like I was a lead or anything like that. But as far as high school sports went, I was a pretty good quarterback. And so there's two different scenarios for me where I felt the most pressure on myself. One was when we played Rockport. It was my senior year, and it was just like a random game, but we hadn't beat them in a long time.
Big rival?
Big rival, and the week before I had really screwed up my foot. Like, at the time I had no idea what was wrong. I went in, and they're like, hey, you know, some kind of muscle in your foot is busted up, but it's not your Achilles. Your Achilles is fine. So they're like, you can play. It's going to hurt like a son of a gun, but you're not going to hurt anything worse. It is what it is.
Yeah.
They're like, this muscle's already torn. It doesn't matter. If you can play through it, you can play through it. And so I was like, okay. Told my coach, I was like, hey, I won't practice all week. I'm just going to play on Friday and make it happen. Mm-hmm. He's like, okay. Like, I don't think he really believed that I was actually going to be able to play. And so we did a walkthrough on Thursday, and you know, I could move a little. Like, I could walk, basically. And so I played this game, and we ended up winning by a couple scores because some people on my team balled out. Like, I did a couple things where it was, you know, okay, but we really had some guys step up. But I just felt like the pressure to play in that moment was so big when, you know, I sat out the next 2 weeks after that game. It turns out I strained my Achilles, which they screwed up. So I could have really screwed up my leg.
It's high school trainers. I wouldn't trust them that much.
Oh, I went to the hospital.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Dang. That's
and
and they told you that it wasn't. Dang.
But anyways, yeah, no, it was. I was in enough pain that I went and got it checked out.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, I tore the muscle under your Achilles, but also strained my Achilles. So it hurt. I did take 2 hydros before the game, so that helped. But that's another example.
When it wore off, I guarantee it.
It wore off about halftime. That's another example of how much pressure I felt. That like, man, like I was like, I'm going to take these pain pills to make this game bearable. And so that, and then my senior year, we lost my final game, 76-74, and that was just like outside pressure. Like, we weren't supposed to beat them, but it was like we were up by 18 in the fourth quarter, and there was, I mean, the game was just crazy. But that was probably the most pressure I felt in a game, just due to like performance standards. And we had a bunch of people get hurt that game. So like by the end of the game, it was literally like we were throwing it or I was running it if there was a play that needed to be made. So it was intense.
Yeah. What coming out of that, would you have done anything different? Would you taken care of yourself and your body first and been like, you know what, I should have? I mean, again, you came out of it unscathed where you didn't get injured, but I could imagine what, like in the NFL, they wouldn't have even tried. They would have been like, no, you're not playing.
Oh, for sure. And like, there's 2 thought processes to this, which is I think that my backup was Hayden. Hayden, I'll put you out there. We would have won the game with Hayden playing quarterback. Okay. Like everybody else just played. Literally, everybody played out of their mind. But I also like that moment was so intense and so elite. Like I don't know if I would trade it back, but I do also know looking back, like if my kid's in that situation, I would be like, no, you're not playing in this game. Like this was. It didn't end up doing anything, but that could have been detrimental to my health. Like tearing my Achilles before I went to college my freshman year, like I could have, you know, my whole life could be different. I could be walking less, like I would be less active for a whole year. Yeah. So I would put on probably 30, 40 pounds going into college. Like it could have completely changed the course of my life just by injuring my leg.
Yeah. That's crazy.
And I was not a high motivation guy. So it's not like I would have been in the gym trying to get back and get in shape to do nothing. Like
you're like, it's my time to take off. I'm going to take it off. I hear you. Huh. Like, was most of the mental strain, was it the stress of it? Or was it more like I'm worried about hurting? Or was it I'm worried about not putting on for my team?
I think it was more I was worried that I wasn't playing good enough to be in this game. Just because I was slow. I couldn't stop, dude. There was one play where literally I ran, got like 8 yards, ran out of bounds, and I didn't stop until I got to the track, which was like 20 yards out because I couldn't, like, the muscle to stop wasn't there.
You couldn't plant your foot?
No. So I had to, like, get to the point where I was, like, slowed down enough to, like, completely turn my body and then walk back. It was awful. There's also one where I kind of broke through the middle, and this homie literally, like, tapped my left foot so my left knee gave out. And normally, like, my right leg would have been just fine. I would have probably scored. And my right leg just gives
Oh,
out.
sure.
My right leg just gives out completely as I'm running, and it just dies, and I just fall. And my coach was like, "You're not okay, are you?" And I was like, "I'm really not okay."
I'm going through it.
But and like I said, since nothing happened, I know I probably wouldn't go back and change it. But I mean, obviously, the opposite scenario is true, man. If my Achilles tears there, it's like, yes, I would have went back and changed and not played that game.
Yeah, I hear you.
I think the other part too was like the other mental strain in the game that we ended up losing. Like, I would say that I played decently well, but like you still feel like you can just go back and do like one thing. Man, I could have changed one thing in that game, one play, and you're like, wow, I could have done that completely differently. I guess that's probably a little bit different than swimming because like, you know, unless it's like maybe like one practice, you're like, man, if I would have just tried a little harder in this practice, I'd be in a little better shape. But there's not as much like plays in the middle of the game where it's like, you know, in the middle of a swimming race, you're probably not thinking, if I would have done this instead of that.
In the middle of competition, yeah. Like
Really?
in the middle of the actual race, I would agree, where you're like, well, I feel like garbage. This is as best I can give. You know, there's definitely motivation factors where you're like, I should have gone into that race with a better mindset. Yeah. Where you're like, okay, you know, and that, you know, I was a very mental swimmer. I was. Luckily, I lucked out with the mental side of swimming. Swimming is extremely mental, and I always had strong mentals through it, where I was able to go like, I'm gonna go beat the shit out of this race. Like that's kind of the mentality I have in a lot of things. And a lot of people in swimming are the opposite of that. Like, oh, I can't do it. I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to be able to get this cut. I'm not going to be able to go this time. I'm not going to be able to break this record. I'm not going to be able to make the relay. And luckily, I had the opposite side of that most of the time. But there were definitely times. But in regards to, like, saying during a race, like, here's why, there were 100% times where you're like, I should have worked harder this season. Like, I skipped a couple practices here and there, and I didn't really. But there were times where it's like, I shouldn't have screwed off so much. I should have focused more in the weight room. I should have done X, Y, Z, to where, throughout the season, you know, you could have changed it, and, you know, maybe you could have made that cut. You know, maybe you could have maybe you should have worked harder in the pool on turns or something, and that would have added up in a mile, you know, which is what I swam. But I think the biggest, like, issue that swimmers have in that regard is, like, the mental side of, like, I'm not gonna be able to do it. I don't have it. You know, it's the confidence level of it. And you kind of have to overcome that and learn how your body works and stuff. You know, it's not like a lot of sports where you can rely on teammates. You know, I mean, in practice you can. You know, that's where you gain the most ground. You're pushing your teammates. The best practices I had was when I finally found out how I needed to train. You know, I was a distance swimmer all through high school, and all my club coach would do, because I never trained, necessarily high school with my high school. I would train 1 day a week just to be around my teammates every other day of the week, 5 days a week, 6 days a week actually, because Saturdays I would be at the club just because the training was that much better. I'm not going to get where I want to be training with my high school. That's just the level that was expected. But when I would, get to races or realize like what I could have done better, and when I finally learned what made me a better swimmer, it was when I realized, like, okay, I don't train like another distance swimmer. I can't just put my head down like I did in club and stare at a black line. Like, I get nothing out of that because I get bored. I don't care. I'm not interested. Once I learned how, to train, I started racing hard, finding a teammate that would push each other, and then all of a sudden my times were just out of this world. And I'm like, finally, see, I've been trying to tell my coaches all this time, and I finally had a coach that understood and went for it. So,
yeah, I feel like definitely if you ever get a chance to talk to Phil in depth about swimming, because I feel like we're going to kind of change the tide to where we're going here. Yeah. I've learned more about swimming in the last 2 weeks from watching the Olympics with Phil than I did literally my entire life.
It's a lot of fun when you get into it, man. It is.
I mean, it's a lot of fun watching it. I did it when we went at the Ozarks and we raced. I had zero fun.
You want to break that down real quick? You want to know? What happened?
Phil had to swim about 500 yards. I had to swim about 250 yards, guesstimate. I won by about 30 yards, maybe 20 yards, 30 yards.
I'd say about 20. I'd say about 20 yards.
So,
when you touch the dock.
So
yeah,
it was. My swimming's
and
not
the punishment. There was a lot at stake, so we were trying. It was. I had to shotgun a Four Loko. Like, that was. I lost. I accepted it. I ended up not shotgunning it, but I did finish it rather quickly.
He did drink it.
But after that swim, and I haven't swam for a year and a half, I was like, I cannot shotgun this Four Loko, Luke. You have, and he was fair. And
I would not have been able to shotgun.
Yeah, no, it was pretty bad. But there was a lot of stakes. We were trying. Neither of us could say like, oh, I gave up. No, we were scared.
Yeah, it was terrified. I haven't drank a Four Loko since college, so.
Neither have I. Yeah.
Well, that was a lot shorter of a time for you when you were in college. I haven't been in college for 3 years, dude.
That's true.
Well, I mean, I guess undergrad. I haven't done a Four Loko since undergrad.
That's fair.
So we're going to kind of dive into the Simone Biles thing here. We definitely have some opinions on it. I'll start with mine, I guess. The first thing I want to say is I don't think either one of us are going to go into a bash on Simone Biles herself. What she did, she thought was best for her mental health, and I feel like that's, if you think that something is ever good for your mental health, that should be the decision you're able to make. And you should have the freedom to make that decision. Thank God we live in America. Because Can you imagine if some Chinese gymnast would have tried to back out because of her mental health?
They would have let her do it at the Olympics because they knew the world was watching, but as soon as she got home,
she would have never been on a gymnastics team ever again for China.
100%. Yeah.
So,
and neither would any of her family or anything like that.
Be thankful for the country you live in. We should probably mention that every podcast because you should be thankful you live in America every single day.
Yeah, I agree. If you're listening to this podcast and you're not thankful, we hope you keep listening and you change your mind. Just leave it at that.
But yeah, so biggest thing here, we're not putting any blame on Simone Biles for the decision she made. She has that freedom, she has that right. And
you have to make the choice for yourself in the long run.
It's best for your health. The biggest thing I'm going to talk about here is I don't like the way that the media has handled celebrating it. I don't know where you're going to come from your perspective. We have not talked on how we're going to come from our different ideas. But my biggest thing is that we live in a blue ribbon society right now, and a lot of kids go through things and, they get a medal. You get fourth place, you get a blue ribbon, the same guy as the first place does.
Yeah.
You get last,
you get a participation trophy.
You get a trophy that says your name on it. And it's like, okay, I understand why in some ways that's beneficial for kids, but it rewards you for losing. And that's not really the way the world works. This is my biggest issue with it because in life, like I'm probably a great example of this. I have a completely commission-based job. If I lose a month, I make no money. Like that, I literally make $0. Phil also gets commissions on his job. If he loses a month, he could get fired. Like if it's bad enough, like you lose your job. That's how the world works.
Yep.
And so
and there's no apologies.
Yeah.
Sorry. Like that's all you get. You get, here's your paperwork. Sign it. You're out the door. You couldn't perform.
And so with Simone Biles, like, yes, she opted out for her mental health. And she's also lucky to be in a situation where she has that freedom. Mm-hmm. Because someone like, one of the employees that works for your business, they couldn't be like, hey, Phil, I'm just going to stop working because of my mental health. They probably could. They could get a day or two off. But in the long run, like, you can't just consistently do that over time or you're not going to be able to keep a job. You're not going to be able to keep something like that.
Yeah.
The fact that Simone Biles has the money and the freedom to do it does set a stage. The other thing I'll talk about is, like, celebrating it sets a bad precedent in the fact that, like, kids, I think, are just going to get softer from it. Like, it's not going to be the scenario where, like, Simone Biles is obviously a tough person. Simone Biles has fought through stuff that make me know, like, she had a real problem. That's why she backed out.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's going to be situations where it's like, this kid's like, oh, there's a lot of pressure on this moment. Well, Simone Biles did it, and it was celebrated. So, like, I'm just not going to play in this game because he's just not in the right mindset, not because of a mental health issue in itself. And I feel like that leaves a lot of, like, gray area to where a lot of people didn't really go in depth with what Simone Biles said. She kind of they just posted the quote where it was like, I'm dealing with my mental health, which is great. And, like, they were trying to use that as clickbait, obviously. But she went in and talked about how, like, she thought it would be dangerous for her to be in the events because if you're not in the right headspace and you mess up a 2.5 and you end up doing a 1 3/4, like, you're dead.
Yeah.
And so she was trying to do a 2.5, ended up doing a 1.5 and landed it. Thankfully, nothing went wrong.
Yeah.
But she's just like, okay, I realize how dangerous this is for myself. I have to pull out for my own safety. Which, good. Like, good for her. But I feel like it is going to lead to kids just being like, oh, like, there's a lot of pressure. I can't do this. I'm just going to quit.
I agree. I think that, I originally, when I saw it, being mental health and the actual mental health awareness that athletes should have, especially, and me knowing a lot about that because I went through it, I think that it does need to be talked about, and I'll get into that. But in regards to, like, how it was portrayed by the media and, like, how they did celebrate it, I agree. I agree that I think it sets a precedent for people in the future. Like, she could be the first one, and I get it, and I support her decision. I support her choice, and I hope that she was being legit. I hope it wasn't just like the fact that she wasn't performing at her best, and she was just like, I'm just gonna quit. I don't think that's who she is. She's obviously won golds in multiple Olympics. Like, she's not that type
and she's
of person.
done that through injuries, physical injuries
Exactly.
that were documented. Like, she is a tough person. That's not debatable.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that the problem with it is I see a double standard. I see a double standard with the idea that athletes should be looked at with this toughness when they're on that stage. And that is true. You get to that stage, you have to be able to handle the pressure. You have to be able to that's part of it. That is the reason you've made it that far. But I also see the double standard, like I said, with the media, where they're like, oh, that comes first. No, in my opinion, that should, you should consider that always. You should consider your health always. That should be, your first priority. But it doesn't mean that it should overshadow sometimes, if it's a minor issue, performing for other people. Like, she wasn't only performing for herself, she was performing for her team, and again, she was performing for her country. They counted on her. And I think that's where there is a double standard of like, listen, yeah, you should always focus on this XYZ, but then you have people that will judge you because you didn't perform to hold up your end of the bargain, which is what part of being on that team is.
I think one thing that's also missed on this subject too is the part that someone didn't get to go to the Olympics because Simone Biles went to the Olympics. Mm-hmm. And so like that also has to suck for them, knowing like, man, I didn't even get a chance and she just went there and quit. And like I said, we're not judging Simone Biles, but there are other aspects to this where it's like, I don't think this should be celebrated. I don't think it should also be like, I don't think you should rag on Simone Biles. But like, we shouldn't just lift her up on a pedestal like this is the greatest, bravest thing that anyone's ever done. No, like, you don't get to be the bravest person ever for quitting. I'm sorry. That is essentially what you did. Mm-hmm. You should be rewarded by your own mental health, and she should be happy with where she's at by making that decision for herself. But like, I just hate when we pedestal things that shouldn't be pedestaled.
I agree.
It happens a lot in our media currently. Another thing that I want to talk about too, though, is a different kind of double standard than what you're talking about, which is the difference between mental health and women's mental health. I know that you were going to get to this at some point in your talk anyways. Me and Phil are both very big advocates of this. It's one thing we want to get into a lot. But I just, like, think about if that was Tom Brady. Tom Brady's like, hey, the Super Bowl's about to be played. There's just a lot of pressure on this moment. I'm going to quit. Do you think that the media would just be like, yeah, that's a good thing, we're going to accept that? Or there would be all kinds of sports media people to be like, you're soft, you're weak, you can't do this because that's the expectation of men. And I mean, like we're saying, my expectation would be for Tom Brady to play because you're an athlete, you're on that stage, you should play. Mm-hmm. But the double standard of media, where it's like, okay, if you were a woman, it's fine, but if you're a man, no, you don't have mental health issues, you're a guy, just fight through it, be an athlete.
Be tough, yeah. No, I get that. I think, and I'm fine with the notion that men should be tough. Like, I'm fine with the notion that there are complete differences with men and women. Men we're
masculine.
Yeah, we're masculine, and women are feminine, and that's okay. Like, so they are in touch more with their emotions. That is literally biological. It's been biology for millennia, right? That's how it works. That's why they have the motherly side of the gene pool, and men have the let's go out, hunt and gather. That's literally the difference between man and woman. It is.
Yeah, you won't hear the demasculinization of men on this podcast.
No, and so I do agree though, because your mentals, that is your most important part of your body, and it is a muscle. It's a functioning organ that should be taken care of just as much as your heart. When you think about someone like working out because they want to keep their heart in shape and themselves in shape, but you'd never hear about people doing and expressing, the actual idea of focusing on mental health and focusing on your brain. That is what is important to move forward and I think gain ground in this idea of athletes being able to talk about this stuff. Last night, Michael Phelps was on being interviewed during one of the breaks in the Olympics, and he was talking about how he went through a lot of mental stuff. And I remember it was after he finished his 2016, his last events and stuff like that, and he was done. And he, obviously someone like that, they're that's their calling. Like, that's all they've done their entire life, and now they have nothing. So And he spoke about how he thinks that the Olympics or the U.S. team should have more psychological help for their athletes, and not just women, but also men's. And again, it should be important for both genders completely. And I think that is something that we should focus on going into the Olympics. Having a coach, just as important for your mental side of your body that it is for your physical side of your body. That is just as important at that level, especially because of the amount of pressure you go into.
Yeah. Just a disclaimer on everything we're talking about, too. Obviously, there came out some stuff a few years ago about the gymnastics coach and sexual assault and anything like that. And if this was in anything related to that, this is a completely different discussion. If there was a trigger of that, like I said, I have a psych degree. I know that sometimes things trigger that you don't even expect. You don't have any idea that would do that. And if that was in any way connected, this is a completely different conversation. And I know that Simone Biles would not want to come out and publicly say that.
Yeah, she probably would never.
No. So just to disclaimer, like that is not factored into anything that we have said as far as thinking that she should have probably stuck through it for her team, anything like that. But yeah, I mean, I just think it's crazy too. Like, you think of Michael Phelps, and then who was it? Lochte. When he was done, he had all those issues come out. Probably because you don't know who you are anymore. You've done this for so long. Mm-hmm. And you were so good. You were the top of the world, and you have nothing to really put that into. You can go, any of those people are smart enough. They're going to be able to go get college degrees and stuff, but you're never going to be the best in the world at something, or at least not for a while. You're going to have to figure out how to do something else and be the best in the world at it.
Yeah. No, that honestly, I'll talk about my journey through that, because I know I've told you many times that, I went through a lot of stuff after I stopped swimming. I obviously wasn't Michael Phelps. I wasn't Simone Biles, but it was still the biggest part of my identity at that point. All through high school, swam club. That was the only thing I focused on. I didn't party. I didn't do. I barely hung out with friends outside of school or outside of swimming, and all my friends were really within swimming. So all I really did, wake up 4:45 in the morning, go to practice, fight my way and trying to stay awake through school. Get in my truck, drive another hour to practice, come all the way back home, get home by 9:30, try to get through my homework, fall asleep, wake up, do it again 6 days in a row, right? That's all it was. That's all it was through school. Then when I got to college, I was used to it at that point where I wouldn't struggle with it, and I knew how to manage it. And I
imagine with that schedule, college was actually easier than high school.
It was. No, I'm serious. A lot of my schedule was based on just driving because of how far I would travel to practice. Yeah. I mean, I drove literally 4 hours a day, 6 days a week. And in regards to college, when I got there, a lot of the people that I swam with were would complain that college is hard. And I'm like, man, this is a breeze, But mentally, though, when I stopped that, it was okay, all I did was focus on swimming. And of course, I tried hard in school. I had to, just because I needed to remain on the team, But it wasn't my number one priority. My number one priority was making sure that I competed well and also got my degree and learned what I needed to learn for the real world. And I did. But then when I stopped, it was such a hard stop because it was so much training, so much being with your best friends every single day in the locker room, at parties, at your house, on the bus, in the hotels, whatever. Every single day for literally 8 years. And all of a sudden it was done. And it was a hard stop. After my last meet, it was okay, who am I now? What do I do? And it was I struggled in school because it was I didn't have that thing always being you have to get this done or you're going to not be able to do what you love. And that's where I'll think a lot of, I went through major depression about a year and a half ago about 2 years ago for about a good solid year. And I remember, it was a long story. I'll try to keep it brief, but there was a hard stop in the spring of my senior year of college. And I had one more semester after that. I had a fall semester. I was graduating in the fall. I stopped swimming and I lost my identity. And I didn't realize how much it affected me until later on when I started seeking help. And that I'll get into another time about how important it is for people to seek help. And it's a sign of strength to seek help and actually go through with it. Seriously, I biggest advocate for it. But such a hard stop and such an end to something that I cared about and spent so much time in. And so I didn't know what I was doing. I drank a lot, and I would, stay up late and just play video games and eat the worst food, and I just became a slob. And I didn't really realize it yet because I still had a lot of friends around because I had that 5th year. And then once I got to school, I had a lot of relationship issues, and I was struggling on that side of my life. And I didn't really know why. And I think it was just because I was so depressed. I just had no drive to do anything. And I would put the blame on me and be like, oh, it was my bad. But I'm like, I didn't know. I had no clue what I was going through mentally until I finally had time to think about it. So then when I graduated in December of, it would have been 2019, I got a job right before I graduated, hired out of school, moved to a new city that I didn't know anyone in, about 2 hours from my school, from my college. And so, I was close to friends, but something I couldn't do every day. Like it would be the weekends maybe, right? And they were still busy. They were all still swimming, a lot of them, and they were all still in college. And then the ones that were my age that graduated, they're back home, different corners of the country. So it was like the only people I could ever talk to in this new town were people from back home. And I had just gotten out of a year and a half long relationship. And it was just messy, and I remember living I moved into this apartment where I was paying $200 a month. It was this piece of garbage. It's the one I talked about where you can see over the wall to the next apartment. The biggest piece of shit you could ever imagine. You walk out into the hallway in the morning when I'd be going to work, and there'd be someone smoking a cigarette outside of my door in the hallway. It was just that type of place.
Elite. Six inside, bro.
Actually, Sig's inside. Maybe that's where we got it from. But so then there was all that where I was so alone, and that was when I finally I had so much time to think because I would go to work, I'd come home, and I would either I started working out because I knew that was good for me, and I knew I had gotten away from that. But I would go home and I would just stare at my ceiling, and that was all I would do every single day. And then I'd wake up, go to work, do it again, and so I had so much time to literally just think and process, like, why am I not happy? Like, I have this great job. I'm starting my career. I graduated well. I have a great family, great support system. I do have great friends. They were obviously busy doing other things. But I was like, why am I unhappy? And so I finally had the biggest moment in my life of strength, in my opinion, and I finally sought help. Because for me, as such a competitive person and someone who, thought that, I can tough out anything. It's not true. You need a support system. And whether that support system is friends or family or professional help, that's what I finally told myself I had to do. And I had, good advice from my dad and some other members of my family who have sought, mental help. And they just were like, trust me, like, go do it. Trust me. And so I went and I did it. And after the first session I had, and I finally broke it down, and the guy I was talking to barely said anything. I said everything, and then he would just kind of go, did you hear what you just said? And he would talk me through it. And it was the biggest eye-opener of like, now it makes sense. I had this identity, and I didn't understand that, and that was all I cared about. And so that helped me forge my way into my professional career outside of swimming, because obviously I couldn't do that my whole life. Even if I went to the Olympics, that's not what I could do my whole life. There's a line you have to just stop. And so he helped me realize that, and the professional help I got helped me realize that. And I was able to, baby crawl into, okay, now I'm going to put my focus towards like my career and focusing on these specific aspects in my life. And I became a better friend. I became a better employee for my company. I ended up climbing the ladder very fast and excelling very well. I immediately moved up a position, moved to a completely new town, which is where I met you guys. And
so that's where it all went wrong, when you met us.
Yeah, and then again it went downhill from there, and now I'm just severely depressed now. But no, and so once I was able to grasp that identity, which I think a lot of athletes struggle from, especially ones that are at a high level, is when they stop, that stuff that cannot just leave you, and you're just like, okay, I'm happy, I'm done. If you enjoyed what you were doing, it's going to be hard. It's just like getting out of a relationship. If you enjoyed the relationship you were in, it's going to be hard. If you lose a best friend, it's going to be hard because of all the great memories and stuff like that, and how much time you spent enjoying it to where you're like, what the hell am I going to enjoy now? So I think that side of things and the mental health side with athletes, I think, is very important. And when I hear Michael Phelps talk about it last night, of like, we need the support structure within the U.S. team, like every sport. There needs to be someone that they can relate to, or some type of program that they can transition to after their Olympics or after their careers, because there's nothing like that. Have you heard of any charity or any organization or any group that helps those athletes? I haven't.
And no, I don't think that people think about that for the most part, because when you think of Olympic athletes, you just think of them as elite. You think of them as studs. You don't think of them as people that need help after they're done. And I think that what you're kind of talking about, and one thing I would definitely advocate very heavily for as far as people goes, is internalizing your purpose, making your purpose something that you can put on yourself. One thing I'll talk about is, just very briefly, is I had a relationship that ended, and I know that like most of my purpose was in that relationship at the time. And so when that ended, it's like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do with my life? Like, I had kind of like coasted through school. School was always very easy for me. I never really had to try very hard. I never really had to do anything. So a lot of my time and effort was put into my friendships and my relationship. And then when I moved from Maryville to Kirksville, I mean, I'm still friends with Micah, and I'm friends with you and Jacob, obviously. Yeah. But the only person I'd really put a lot of time and effort into my friendship was with Micah, and the rest of my friendships were just kind of like, okay, like, where do I go from here? Like, I spent all my time with my friends, all my time with my ex-girlfriend. Like, what do I do with my life at this point? And so I kind of just figured out that, like, you can't lose it if you internalize your purpose. Like, my purpose now is just to be a hardworking person, to get better every day at whatever I'm doing, whether that be work, whether that be, us working out, things like that. And no one can take that away from me. I mean, if I die, it's gone. But if I die, I don't have to worry about how motivated I am the next day. You can't. Sure. If I get fired, okay, I'm going to find something else. I'm going to get better at that. If, I break my leg, okay, I can't work out, but I'm going to do something else. I'm going to get better at that today. And I know that's so cheesy. That's literally the cheesiest line ever, get better every day. But whatever you can find for your purpose that you can commit to your own body and your own mentality, and you don't have to externalize and put it on somebody else that could, somebody that could leave or something that could go wrong that you can't control, I think that's very important for your mental health, because you're in control. And feeling not in control is where a lot of mental health issues, especially anxiety and things like that, really come into play.
Yeah, no, 100%. And for those listening, I think that's extremely important. Something that I've and Luke have talked about, and something that we've kind of gained through going through a lot of mental stuff. And I remember probably the best conversation I've ever had with someone my age was when me and Luke were driving back from a road trip, just randomly. And this was a year ago, more than a year ago, to where like we barely knew each other. And I literally was like, do you want to like drive up, take a 5-hour trip with me? And it was the best conversation I've ever had about everything between relationships and swimming and my depression, because that was kind of when I was coming out of it last year.
Yeah, and that was right when I had ended my relationship. We were kind of like, I was kind of coming into what you were coming out of.
Yeah.
And it was kind of just perfect timing where we had this whole conversation. And it really was. It was elite. I opened my eyes on a lot of things, on the way I was acting and the way, because I felt sorry for myself. I would say that's the biggest thing, where it's like, this stuff happened to me and I couldn't do anything about it. And in a lot of situations, that wasn't true. Like, for the most part, I put myself in those situations. I did things to put myself in that situation by the way that I control my mental health at that point.
Yeah.
So just getting that perspective of like, okay, you're not the only person that's done this before, but like this is also how you come out of it.
That's big too, is realizing you aren't the only person. And I know everyone says that, and they're like, trust me, you're not the only one that needs help. You're not the only one going through it. But like, until that actually clicks, you have to understand, to have like a good mindset going forward in your life, and trying to tackle issues day to day, or huge issues like these issues we just talked about. You have to have the mindset of like, it is a sign of strength, not weakness, to realize, listen, I'm not the only one going through some stuff, and that there are outlets to figure out what is going wrong in your life. Whether that be actually seeking professional help like I had to, or whether that be like reconnecting with friends. Like a lot of issues I've had in life was like, I lost friendships, and that really hurt me for some reason, and it was a natural falling out. It wasn't like, oh, like we had an issue, but it was just like I lost friends, so I have tried to fix those. You have to take control of your life, and that is something that's extremely important. And what Luke, I think you were alluding to, is like, you have to have that alpha mindset where you're like, listen, I control my own destiny. I control what my future will be, and I control how I'm going to tackle it. I think that's something that especially men who this isn't talked about enough with have to understand. You have to have this alpha mindset where you go and you tackle it, and you fucking grab life by the horns and you go for it. And if until you figure that out, and until you understand that's how you need to go forward, then you're going to keep spiraling. Like you and I have both done.
I also think we need to kind of touch on the word alpha, because I think that a lot of people have preconceived notions on it. And I know that me and you like the term a lot, and I love the way that we use it is elite. Like the way that we mean it. But when a lot of people think of an alpha, they think of like some douchebag that's only out from themselves. Like that is not what we're talking about here. This is taking control of what you can control, but still being there for other people like when they need it. Like especially in relationships, that's where I'm hesitant to use the term alpha, because in friendships, like I would say me and Phil are both alphas in most of our friendships. And in our own friendship, we're probably both alphas, which usually that doesn't work out very well, but somehow it does. But that doesn't mean like if my friend needs something, I'm like, oh, I'm the alpha. I'll take control here. I'm going to do what I need to do. No, you still have to be.
An alpha is a leader.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Like you're an alpha because you take control of the situation to help them, not to do what's best for yourself in every scenario.
It's more of a sign of strength. Like and people will notice when you are the right type of leader and quote unquote alpha and the wrong type of alpha. People know what a douche is. People know what a jock that just like that's that type of alpha where that's what they think they are.
I just wanted to touch on that because I know before I met you, anytime I heard the word alpha, that's all I thought of was just some douche that was out for themselves.
When I say it now, it's almost like it has a stigma to it, and it still does. It still does because you're like, oh, I'm an alpha, you're a beta. Like that's not what I mean.
Somebody else doesn't have to be a beta for you to be an alpha.
Exactly, and I think it really does stem down to leadership of not only like the people around you and taking control and being that good person, like a real good leader. There are good leaders and there are bad leaders. You can be both, or you can be one or the other. You can be a good leader where people will follow you either because they're scared, because they're intimidated, and that's the bad alpha. The good alpha is the good leader who cares for the people around them, who takes care of the people around them, who grabs life by the horns and makes sure that everyone around them is protected or
and growing. I would say a big thing is growing. Like you want to make sure the people in your circle aren't staying put, and sometimes that means having really hard conversations with your friends. I know that we've had a couple in the last 6 months or so with a couple of our friends that we kind of thought, hey, you need to do this, or you're gonna do like your life's gonna go downhill if you don't kind of take control of the situation. And those are hard conversations. They are very difficult to have. But I would say coming out now, like, our friends would be happy that we kind of like sat them down and had those conversations. No,
and I know, and I also think it should be stressed that like there's not times where you and I need to have our asses sat down.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I need my ass sat down a lot,
constantly, and but a big part of having that leadership mentality is being able to accept that. A shit leader is someone who is told, oh, XYZ you're doing wrong, and they go shut up, like I don't need to hear from you, blah blah blah. No, a good leader and a good person with a good personality with those leadership skills and those that have the ability to take control of those around them or themselves is going to be able to take criticism, whether it be very bad or something that's like, hey, that was great, XYZ, and here's the reason why. A great way to prove who really is that good leader is someone that can take that well, no matter if it's good or bad. And
I'm not very good at taking good. I'm really bad at that, honestly. I'm really good. You roast me, I'm like,
but you know what's important is you understand that.
Yeah, I hate getting complimented. I hate it.
But I'm not saying compliment. I'm just saying like
constructive criticism. I also hate that. No, I want you to roast me. That's how I learn.
That's fair. Like again, when I was in athletics, I needed someone to get in my face.
Tell me I'm a piece of shit. Tell me I'm a piece of garbage. Tell me I'm fat and I need to go to the gym. That's my motivation.
Swear to God. And I do that all the time to you. And it works. And it works. It literally works. But yeah, I think that that side of like the mental health thing, I think is important too for men. Like you especially guys our age, you are at the point where you need to make sure that you are controlling your own bag. You are making sure that you are putting yourself first, only for the reasons that is actually important, like mental health, stuff like that. Like you need to make sure that, okay, I'm gonna focus on myself, but not be selfish about it. Yeah. And then I think there is a fine line there, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because especially my biggest point is like with relationships, because there's going to be a lot of things in relationships where it's not necessarily the best thing for you, but it's the best thing for the relationship. And you have to make that line to where, okay, is this something that I'm okay with long term? And I know it's not my favorite thing, but can I deal with it? And if you're like, yes, and it's going to make her very happy, then yeah, you got to do that. But if it's one of those things where you're like, in 5 years, this is a deal breaker for me if I go through with it right now.
Mm-hmm.
You got to tell her that. You got to be like, you got to be open and honest about stuff, and communicating your strengths and weaknesses will go a long way in life and in relationships. You have to be open enough. And I think that that's something else that's stigmatized in America too, where like men aren't supposed to talk about their feelings or their emotions. And that's why so many relationships are so ugly and so toxic because, and I will speak to
that's
that.
why people aren't getting married.
For my own relationships, I struggled so hard with talking about my emotions. I still do to this day. I'm not very good about it.
Yeah.
But, in the last, however, few months and since we started talking about our stuff a lot more, I feel like it's a lot easier for me. And even in my, last relationship that obviously didn't go well, here we are single, but I was better about talking about my emotions, and that made a lot of things smoother.
Let me ask you a question. Sure, we're single, and that is kind of a personal choice for both of us, though.
Yeah.
At this point, part of that taking control is you have to understand where you lie and where that there is a line that you don't want to cross. And a lot of times in our relationships, especially the ones that we know about between you and I, part of being that mature person and being able to take control of your life is knowing like, okay, this is where I draw the line, and not just letting it get pushed back, because then that's when it gets really ugly.
And I will say, I've always been good at that, drawing that line, because I would say I've always been really good.
You push it forward.
Yeah, I'm like, hey, no, get back. No, but I'm really quick. I think that, one thing that I've always prided myself on, and I have blown this rule for myself, is, I have broken up with girls for solely the reason of I knew you weren't the one. And I've had that thought process before, and I've gone back on my own word. And guess what? I was right the first time, every single time that I'm like, I thought that. I've talked to girls and just like talked to recently where it's like, yeah, I went back and like, gave it another shot, and like it ended up being the same exact thing. Like your brain knows when you're confident and you know what you're looking for, don't second guess yourself. That would be my biggest thing too. Confidence is key, man. If you're confident about who you are, not necessarily, and there's cockiness, which I tread that line a lot. I'm very high on myself, which is a positive, and it can be a negative at times. But when you're confident in who you are, which I have always been very confident in like what I want to do and who I want to be in life, a lot of that mental health stuff kind of takes care of itself in the long run.
I would say, to your point, I think it's trading the word confidence with satisfaction. You're satisfied with who you are, and for me at least, like I think that would be how I would describe having that confidence in myself.
I like the term confidence, but just because you can be satisfied with something, like to me, okay, if I eat and I'm satisfied, like that was an okay meal, it was good enough. I like the term confidence because I'm confident in myself. I'm not just satisfied. It's not just good enough. I am extremely happy with who I am. Yeah. And I don't ever want to be just good enough in anything that I do. There have been moments in life where I have just been satisfied, and that at times it happens. You get a C, you pass. In life, sometimes you're satisfied, and that's all you were going to get in that moment because you snuck out with a win. Mm-hmm. But for the most part of my life, I don't want to just be satisfied. I want to be pleasured. Yeah. I don't know what another word is.
Yeah.
You get the point.
I know what you're saying. And I think that's something that we want to stress too is like satisfied, I guess, was the wrong word. You should strive for that next level. You should not go through life just with the mediocre mindset. Or okay, you're gonna be mediocre. If you think about yourself and you look yourself in the mirror and you think, you're not where you want to be in life, but you tell yourself like, oh, it's gonna be too hard to hit that next step. Correct. That is right. If you tell yourself you're not going to be that next step, then that is true. You will not. You will not. Someone will take the place of you. Someone who says they look themselves in the mirror and they go, you know what? I understand my flaws, but I know what I can do to fix it, get around it, climb that ladder. And that is something that I think sets apart those who have that quote unquote alpha mindset and those who have the quote unquote beta mindset. I'm not saying that there should be that comparison of alpha and beta. Like that sounds like such a Chad thing to say, but there is truth behind it. Yeah. There is truth.
I think going off that, this could probably be a good spot to kind of close this out. Just where you're thinking from your perspective, and you're talking about being satisfied, and if you look in the mirror and you think, like I'm gonna be mediocre. Have you ever at one point in your life tried so hard at something, failed or succeeded, looked back and been like, I regret that. I regret trying so hard for that moment. Except for maybe a girl, because sometimes you're like, man, why did I put so much effort into her? She was trash. But no, as far as improving your own life, have you ever put a lot of effort into something and completely regret it?
No, and I also
have you ever had something where you didn't put a lot of effort and you're like, man, I really wish I would have done that?
Yes, but getting to your point with the whole side of like girls in that regard, I've also, even though I've put a lot of effort, when I look back, because I've hit a stage of maturity where I'm past all that, and I'm past, most of my exes in the past, where I'm like, I look back and I'm like, right then and there, I was like, why did I spend so much money? Why did I put in all this effort? Why did I do X, Y, Z? But I look back and I'm like, I'm happy I did, because it helped me learn that what I don't want to do the next time. So to your point, no, there hasn't been a time where I have put in a lot of effort. When I finally have the time to react and think about it and process, I do not regret it at all. But there have been a lot of times.
I can't relate on the money side. I think that there's a lot of stuff money-wise where I'm like, I regret that. I take that money back right now.
But I'm cheap. And so that when I say spend money, it's not
much. Oh, no, I remember I spent $1,000 at Worlds of Fun one time on a date. There's multiple occasions where I dropped over $1,000 in a day just on dates.
What?
Yeah.
There's been maybe one of those for me. One. And most of the money
I didn't make very much money. Phil definitely makes more money than me throughout the course of his lifetime.
I don't know if that's true. Again, you have a commission-based job.
Absolute save. No, I'm talking throughout college.
Saving.
I didn't have a job in college. I didn't work. I didn't have money. I literally got paid to go to school, and that's all that I had.
That's fair.
And I blew it on going on dates.
Hey,
food. I ate so much Mexican food.
But regardless of the actual physical dollars you spent.
But I grew.
Yeah, 100%. I think that is something important that people should gather from this is don't look at connecting back to the mental health thing, and when I had all that time to look at the stuff that I went through and why I was the way I was and why I was reacting the way I was reacting, right? Now I look at it and I go, that time spent, it was not wasted. So understand when you are going through stuff and you have these faults or whatever, and you think you're at a loss, you think you're having a struggling relationship, or you're post-athlete depression, etc. When you're going through that, look at the stuff you've gone through and be thankful for it, and understand look at how much this is going to teach me. And it is so hard to look at it when you're in that time period. When you're in the time frame that you're going through it, it is so difficult, because I didn't do it. I'll admit I could not do it. I was told many times by family, both my parents, the freaking therapist I spoke to, you're going to be a better person. You're going to grow from this. I was like, how? I'm miserable. Every single thing I do is just, how am I growing? I'm absolutely digging a hole is how I felt. Yeah. So when you exit that, trust me, there will be a point later on down the road with all these hardships, mental, physical, whatever, you will find the silver lining and go, wow, okay, now I understand, first of all, it's God's plan, and I understand why I went through this, and also look at all I learned. You will learn from it if you give yourself the time and you have the respect for yourself to actually look inward and understand it.
I will say that I think the old weightlifting cliche, no pain, no gain, really pops in here. Because I will say, when everything's going smooth, you don't learn a lot about yourself. You don't learn a lot about life. Mm-hmm. And then you go through struggle. And if you really use those opportunities like you're talking about, you can grow so much. You can learn so much about yourself. I would say obviously you can kind of grow when it's going smooth. You can be like, hey, I need to mature in this way, that way. But when you're really hurting and you really are like, man, I am going through it. And you look back on that and you're like, all those things I did, I can do this different, I can do that different. It's such a relief, too, to finally realize that wasn't for nothing. Mm-hmm. When you go back and you look at all the stuff you've learned through those painful times, you're like, wow, that sucked at the time, but man, I am such a better person
100%.
Now than I was then.
100%. Is there a hardship, we'll end it on this. Luke, is there a hardship that you went through? A real hardship, not a simple breakup, for not a serious relationship, not a, I had to move or whatever. Something serious that you had struggled inward that you do not think you gained from at all. Is there a single one where you're like, there was this that I was miserable from, and I don't think there was anything from it?
No. I thought for a long time, I won't get very in-depth on this, but my dad left when I was a kid, and my parents got divorced, and my dad really turned into a not nice guy in a lot and did a lot of things that weren't nice. And I thought that was something that I would never grow from. I thought that this was just God, why did you put me in this situation? There's no positive that can ever come out of that. Mm-hmm. And man, we can sit there now and you guys can give me shit about all the stuff my dad did and all that stuff. And it doesn't bother me because I grew from that. Like, that made me such a stronger person. And that is, like, one of the worst things that I ever went through by far.
Yeah.
And so if you really reflect on any... Now, there are situations of trauma where you're probably not going to want to reflect on them. Mm-hmm. And that's completely different. But if you can go through the moment and you can bear to reflect on a moment...
Do it.
Do it. You're going to grow from it. You're going to learn something about yourself in the process. And it's going to hurt. Like, we're not saying that it's just going to be this rainbows and butterflies and it's going to go very easy. Mm-hmm. Because going through pain, again, still hurts. But the reward is worth it in the end to me.
Yeah. And I guarantee in the long run, say down the road, if you ever end up having kids with, God forbid, I hope you don't. But
good luck to those puppies.
Yeah, you're going to be a hell of a lot better father. And you know what not to do. I mean...
Leave. Don't leave.
Yeah. Fair. Anyways, I think that's a pretty good spot to wrap it up. That was a good conversation.
Yeah, that was intense.
Yeah, it was.
It didn't help that it's like 1,000 degrees in here, so that's definitely hurt it on us.
Yeah, and that's that topic we just kind of delved into, I think, is a good conversation we're going to have at some point, and it'll be a very good episode because we're going to have a guest on, and we're going to kind of delve into the importance. We're going to kind of connect this topic with it, and it'll be down the road, but kind of with how important fatherhood is and kind of finding that father figure in your life. Because all of us, roommates here especially, and people that we want to have on our podcast, all have different backgrounds in that. And I really look forward to that episode because I'm just going to sit there and listen. Because in all reality, I had a great father, and I had a great childhood growing up and a great role model. And I know that, like you didn't. And
I will toss out that I had an amazing stepdad that made that transition a lot easier. So I don't want to get like crapped on like I didn't ever have a father figure.
That's okay.
But I did deal with the struggle of I didn't let him in mentally for a long time.
Okay.
And we'll get more into that.
Yeah.
But I'm just giving him a shout out right now. Don't think I'm not saying I have a father
figure. And I wasn't saying you had
good.
none at any point. I'm just saying you lost that one that you did have.
My actual father. Correct.
Yeah. So that will be a good one, and that'll be down the road, and we'll make sure that it's a very good conversation. We give it some time because, again, I really just want to sit there and listen, give my opinions, but mostly just ask questions. So if you made it to the end of the podcast here, we're going to be posting this again on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and if you made it to the end here,
we apologize.